Now we get to the Marvel side of our cinematic universe starting in 2013. Now I was also kind of unsure where to start, but then similar to the DC side, I got a revelation really quickly. I think the best opening film you could possibly do is The Amazing Spider-Man in 2013. Similar to DC, the years would have been tweaked, but here it makes a little bit more sense. Maybe in this world, somehow Iron Man couldn't get off the ground for whatever reason, and nothing ever came from the project. But then, Justice League Mortal came out instead and became such a huge success. Marvel tried to get various things off the ground but couldn't. However, they heard that Sony was planning to make a Spider-Man reboot. And similar to our universe for the Tom Holland movies, they decided to make a deal to start their cinematic universe this way. Hence why the extra year, so that they could broker the deal and whatnot. So in this universe, Marvel's version essentially would have started from Amazing Spider-Man, which isn't totally out of nowhere, since it was also revealed recently that they did at first plan to put Amazing Spider-Man into the MCU continuity when Avengers was released, but they ultimately decided against it. Now, it could have been total bullshit, it could have been a clickbait article, I don't know, but if it is true, then there is some precedent with this idea. And obviously we eventually got it later down the line with the Tom Holland movies. It would have been written by James Vanderbilt, Alvin Sargent, and Steve Kloves, and directed by Mark Webb. Next up is The Avengers. Similar to how the DC Universe started with a team movie and that was made into spin-offs, they would be doing that here with the exception of Spider-Man because they needed their most popular character to really get going. So with this, the movie would still be relatively the same except with more added backstory because of the lack of setup. The team in this case would be Iron Man, Hulk, Captain America, Thor, and then the two major differences, Spider-Man and Hellcat. Since most of the actors in the actual film were either unknown, like Hemsworth, or weren't popular at the time, like Downey and Evans, I would imagine that the casting stays the same, and with that, Ruffalo would be Banner, since that would have made more sense. And then for Hellcat, get someone like Karen Gillan or Danielle Panabaker, someone who would have been kinda known at this point, but not totally known. Loki would be the villain. It would have been written and directed by Joss Whedon. Next is The Incredibl Hulk. Again, relatively similar to the movie we got, but again, it would have to be majorly tweaked now that it takes place after the Avengers rather than before, like in our universe. Abomination would still be the villain, and I would stick with the origin he would have had like in the 2008 film, as his other backstory is a lot. However, here they would have made Abomination to be a part of the Avengers, kind of like that one-shot retcon in our universe. But he was too unstable, so they had to find the Hulk to be a part of the team. Abomination eventually breaks out and starts wreaking havoc, and eventually Hulk has to stop him, while also dealing with his own Jekyll and Hyde sides and dealing with the monster inside of him. It would have been written by Zach Penn and James Schamus and directed by Louis Leterrier. Next is Ant-Man 2014. This is essentially Edgar Wright's film again, as it does kind of make sense to use it here again. The cast and story would remain the same and would have been essentially what I explained in my previous What If Universe video. It would be written and directed by Edgar Wright. Next is The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Essentially the movie we got, but hopefully a little bit better and a little bit more streamlined. Electro would have essentially been the main villain, and it would have developed him further, as well as not having Green Goblin in the film at all, and not have the death of Gwen Stacy featured. Harry Osborn's transformation into Green Goblin would be saved for a post-credit scene, however here he would only get the suit and not the glider. Because why would he need the glider? Rhino would still have his small cameo at the beginning and end of the film. There would be more development for Peter and Harry as characters, and Flash would become Peter's friend like he was in the comics, and pretty much have the best parts of the movie and put them here and flesh them out. It would be written by James Vanderbilt and Jeff Pinkner and directed by Mark Webb. Next is Daredevil. So similar to what I was doing with DC with Teen Titans and Doom Patrol and the such, I'm doing a similar thing here with Daredevil. Pretty much a more condensed version of the first season with Kingpin as the main villain. I think Charlie Cox could still fit here as well. It would be directed by Chad Stahelski and David Leitch and written by Drew Goddard and Stephen S. DeKnight. Next is Captain America. So similar to Wonder Woman, this would not be an origin story with Cap being in his prime. It would take place in present day, and the villain would be Baron Helmut Zemo. It could have similar themes to Winter Soldier with Cap being in the present day and that sort of thing. It would involve Zemo setting off the Mad Bomb and turning the whole world into berserker zombies, as this was allegedly one of the plot lines for the third Captain America movie, but I thought I liked the idea so much I decided to use it here. It would be written by Michael Dougherty and directed by J.J. Abrams. Next is Iron Man. So here, again, no origin story, but they could show up in possible flashbacks. The villain would be a proper version of the Mandarin, whether it be the Middle Eastern version that was at first shown in Iron Man 3, or the original Asian version as shown in the comics, and retcon for Shang-Chi. But it would be Iron Man against his most deadly foe. It would be written by David Hayter and directed by Gareth Edwards. Next is Thor. First Thor movie would have the introduction of Hela as the main villain, except a little bit more accurate to the comics, so that it would tie back into the Avengers and Loki. But it would be a bit more of an epic, rather than the fish out of water story of the first one, despite how much I like it. It would be written by Zack Penn and directed by Zack Snyder. Next up is The Amazing Spider-Man 3. Now, I know there were some ideas in regards to the sequel, like bringing dead people back to life and shit like that, but we're not doing that because that's fucking stupid. And Gwen didn't die in this case, so it's fine. Then the villain would obviously be Green Goblin and some smaller underlings to help him destroy Peter's life, like maybe Chameleon, Shocker, Hydro Man, guys like that. However, their roles would be very small. This is the movie where Gwen dies rather than the previous one, and it has Peter retiring as Spider-Man. There would be a post-credit scene that would tease the Sinister Six. It would be written by Jeff Pinkner and directed by Mark Webb. Next, we have Captain America 2. This would have been pretty much what was promised for the third Captain America movie instead of Civil War, even though it was never intended to be the case. But since it probably would have been way better than the shitstorm we got, it would be Cap going against the Serpent Society. It would have been written by Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely and directed by the Russo brothers. Next is the Avengers Contingency. This would essentially be Marvel trying to rip off DC with their team versus one guy Justice League movies. In this case, it would be the Avengers up against Taskmaster. He's kind of similar to Amazo by using their powers against them and that kind of thing. Ant-Man would replace Spider-Man since he is retired. It would be written and directed by Joss Whedon. Now there's Iron Man 2. This would pretty much take Nando's idea for a better version of Iron Man 2 and put it here. Justin Hammer would be the main villain and he would become Titanium Man. You could also have War Machine in this film as he was in the original film. It would be written by Justin Theroux and directed by Jon Favreau. Next is Inhumans. Similar to the Inhumans movie I had in my other video, it would kind of be something similar here. Maybe not as excessive, and the villain this time around would be the Unspoken and maybe saving Maximus for a sequel, but it would have a Game of Thrones type vibe. It would be directed by Kenneth Branagh and written by Raven Metzner. Then we have Thor 2. This would essentially be even more epic than the first one, with Surtur being the main villain. It wouldn't be Ragnarok, just very much an apocalyptic type fantasy film with being very big and very epic. It would be written by Zack Penn and directed by Andy Muschietti. Next is Sinister Six Part 1. So this would be one of the movies that was planned for Sony's Spider-Verse, and I think it makes sense to add it here, since Spider-Man would be their biggest moneymaker. It would feature some returning villains like Rhino, Green Goblin, this time as the Goblin King, and Electro, but would then introduce Vulture, Dr. Octopus, and Scorpion. With no Spider-Man to stop them, they decide to turn New York into a totalitarian state run by fear. It's not till the climax of the film that Spider-Man comes out of retirement to stop them, but in the cliffhanger ending, he is seemingly killed. It would be written and directed by Drew Goddard. Then we have The Irredeemable Ant-Man. This film would involve Scott being blamed for a crime he didn't actually commit, and he has to go on the run. Well, the person who committed the crime was a person named Eric O'Grady, who would be in his Black Ant persona. They eventually realize that there is a bigger threat out there, and while Scott has to clear his name, Eric has to learn to become a true hero. You could have any other big villains be a puppet master. It could be MODOK, could be someone smaller, who knows. It would be written by Chris McKenna and Eric Summers and directed by Peyton Reed. Then there is Sinister Six Part 2. So it would continue where the film left off, with Spider-Man being seemingly killed. He of course doesn't die when it's revealed he was rescued by Miles Morales, who nurses him back to health. Then essentially the rest of the movie would be Peter fighting the Sinister Six one by one until they are all defeated. Final battle is Spider-Man and the Goblin King, and Spider-Man obviously stops him. by killing him. He then officially goes back into retirement. There would be a post-credit scene with Miles Morales getting bitten by the radioactive spider. It would again be written and directed by Drew Goddard. Next is Doctor Strange. It would be similar to the movie we got, but Dormammu would be more of a threat rather than Caecilius and his band of misfits as the main villain. It would not be an origin story, with Strange already being Sorcerer Supreme and the like. It would be directed by Sam Raimi. Then finally, we have the Avengers Skrull War. It would essentially be a very loose adaptation of the Kree-Skrull War arc in the comics, with the Avengers getting trapped in the middle, but with no one on their side. It would be going for what the original comic was going for, with its commentary on war and the like. It would be written and directed by Joss Whedon. So, that is it for my What If universe involving DC and Marvel switching places in time, with DC being the more successful one and Marvel playing catch-up. Just an interesting idea about what could have been, even if very unlikely, but less so than done previous. See y'all next time.